So I'm actually originally from South Texas, and there is a great store there called Central Market. It's owned by the H-E-B stores, and I was there. This has been probably 10 years ago, and this was this poster. Well, it was actually a drawing, was over their pepper display, and they probably have 30 or 40 different types of peppers. And I thought it was such a hoot because it really talked about what is about a pepper as far as what's spicy and what is not is sweet. So this is actually a diagram of the Scoville chart. So I just thought it was just kind of cute. And so let's move to the next slide. So peppers have been around for almost, for like 6,000 years ago. They came from Mexico. Peppers are capsium. That's the name of the element that's in peppers that give it the heat. They're one of the oldest cultivated crops in the Americas. They're members of the nightshade family, along with potatoes and tomatoes and eggplants, and also tobacco. And of course, the nightshade family is one of the most poisonous families of plants in our environment. Peppers are self-pollinating, so you don't really have to have bees. All pepper fruits, which are actually classified as berries, they have ripened ovaries containing seeds formed after pollination. When you read about peppers, sometimes they will say that water-stressed peppers produce hotter fruit. Sometimes that is true, sometimes it is not. I really do believe that when you look at a pepper on a bush, you really don't know. It can be a variation of heat just on the same plant. So I'm not exactly sure how one pepper ends up being hotter than the other. They say that it's water stressed, but sometimes I think it's just within how it's been pollinated and just the temperature and what has affected the pepper over the growing season. So capsium, the element that's in peppers, is a natural defense against predators. So let's go to the next slide. So back in 1912, there was a pharmacist. His name is William Scoville, and he was the one who devised the Scoville organoleptic test. And the Scoville scale is how you can measure the spicy heat of a chili pepper. It is a very scientific method. They take a particular amount of dried pepper. They put it in some alcohol or water with sugar, and they actually had taste testers. So, and the number of those Scoville heat units indicates the amount of capsium present in each pepper. Now, as you can tell, I wouldn't want to be the taste tester for Carolina Reaper, but that's how they did test these peppers. Go to the next slide. And when you read in all the literature, sometimes it's a little confusing because sometimes you'll have 2 types of peppers and sometimes up to 6. So sometimes they are classified by sweet versus spicy, or they are classified by their shapes. So sweet peppers have no heat, have very little capsium. So those are like bell peppers, banana peppers, pimentos, marconis, and cherries. They have very little capsium and very little heat. And then I always put them into 2 categories. It's either sweet or spicy because they really are all different kinds of shapes of peppers. Hot peppers, on the other hand, depending upon their amount of capsium, depends, will decide what the heat is on the pepper. So a poblano, which is really one step up from a bell pepper, has some heat. But then a poblano only has about 1,000 to 1,500 units. But then it moves up to, you get a jalapeno, you can go up to 5,000. Habaneros are much hotter. Those are, like 100,000 to 500,000 units. So it just depends on the pepper. Let's go to the next slide. And this is just my references. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kathleen, and she is going to talk about how to plant the peppers and how to support peppers throughout the growing season. So let's turn it over to Kathleen.
Thank you. Okay, if we can go one more slide forward, please. So when I consider what to put in my vegetable garden, I always start off with, why am I doing this? My first screen is, do I like this produce? And my second screen is, can I do a better job than what I can buy? With respect to all peppers, I think you can count on a greater depth of flavor if you plant your own sweet or hot peppers. The sweet peppers, one of the factors I think is most of the peppers that we buy in the grocery store come to us refrigerated, and then we keep them refrigerated. They've been refrigerated on the way to the refrigeration. And there's something about a sweet pepper when you, whether you pick it when you're green or you let it ripen to be red, something about the warmth of the sun interacting with the skin of that fruit, those produce, I think, a greater depth of flavor that makes it worthwhile to plant peppers in your garden. But my real thing is hot peppers, in line with what Cindy presented. If you decide, if you like hot peppers, if you use them in cooking, or if you like to dry them and give them as holiday gifts, you'll find that if you plant your own, you have an access to a much wider variety of peppers, especially hot peppers. It's easy to find sources for seeds. Can we go on one more slide? It's easy to find seeds online to start. One of the places that I like is Baker Seeds. They have a lot of heirloom varieties. And if you decide to go from seed, you can start indoors, do it in February so that true leaves to support photosynthesis will appear before you transplant them to the garden. And it's a good idea to wait until after April 15th at a minimum. I usually wait until May 1st to put them out. If you do start from seed, hardening is very important for pepper plants. The stalk is very tender, even more so than tomato plants. And by hardening, I mean leave them outside in partial sun for an increasing number of hours per day over the course of a week, starting, a week to 10 days before you transplant to the garden. And you'd be surprised, just even a little breeze across those seedlings will strengthen them and give you a better yield in the garden. The alternative to starting from seed, if you're not inclined to do that, is there are a lot of good varieties available at area nurseries. It seems like some of the people out there who do the starts, for example, when Jim Meadows was alive and running Meadows nurseries, I mean, his legacy lives on because they've got a crazy number of varieties of hot peppers that you can pick. So don't feel left out of the hot pepper game if you don't feel like starting from seed. There's tons of interesting and weird little peppers you can find in 3-inch pots at lots of nurseries around here. Let's go to the next slide, please. Pepper plants do need stake support because even if you harden them, they're still tender stalks in the garden when they start out. Usually, I use 24-inch bamboo stakes, and that's plenty of length. And use something gentle. Don't bind the plant tightly to the stake. Maybe use a twister from an old bread bag or something, but give it some slack so that the plant, the stalk is not cut off. And these bamboo stakes are a pretty good investment because they do last at least a couple of years, especially if you pull them out of the dirt at the end of the season so they don't spend the winter in wet soil. The other trick with respect to plants, once you decide you've got a good place to stake them, is don't underestimate the shade the surrounding plants will create for that pepper plant. The pepper plants, generally, the hot ones and the sweet ones, remain short and compact. So shading is a concern, and that's a mistake I've made many, many times, thinking that, that rhubarb will never grow over here. I'm safe, planting it over here. And I've been wrong many, many times, and then it's too late to transplant the plant. So learn from my mistake in that respect. Can we have the next slide, please? You're getting lucky if you see white blossoms. They're usually white. And those are that's the precursor that it's actually going to produce fruit. When the fruit does appear, watch for the peppers to achieve the intended color, which you can tell from your online research or from the package. Sometimes they come in green, and the packaging will tell you that they're intended to turn red or yellow. Pay attention to that, but harvest periodically to keep other blossoms producing fruit. If you keep the fruit on the plant is going to continue to put energy into that fruit rather than helping the other blossoms turn into fruit. My experience with pepper plants is that they're relatively disease-free. I've not had any bad luck with hot pepper plants, I think probably because they're so well defended by the high capsicum content. And the only mistake I've made that has reduced yield is overwatering. I use a drip irrigation system, and some of the plants in the garden I feel need daily watering, but I've learned to back off over time and do it every other day. That overwatering will produce yellowing leaves, and that's a bad thing. Next slide, please. I love hot peppers. They're I think easier to grow than sweet peppers. I think it's because when they are finished growing, they're pretty small. There's not a lot to mess up. Cindy covered the Scoville scale, and it is important to get an idea of what you're handling before you commit to a variety. They're easy to freeze, and they're easy to use over the winter. You can dry them. So I love to grow the hot peppers, not only for the color and the variety, but because they're so easy to use and they extend your ability to enjoy what you grew in the garden throughout the winter. Could we have the next slide, please? These are our two publications from Virginia Tech. The second one is more about sort of when to plant things, and it's a good resource not only for pepper plants, but for all plants. And then for some of the technical background on peppers and the other two nightshade families that were mentioned by Cindy, publication 426, 413 is a good reference. And so that's the extent of my
Let's turn it over. Thanks so much, Kathleen. That was very informative, and I learned something new. So let's move over to Lippy, and she's going to talk about more about peppers.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm going to take over after, where Kathleen left. Can we move to the first slide, please? Yeah. Once the plants have been hardened and transplanted into the ground, you should think of applying organic mulch. This will help conserve soil moisture and prevent soil compactations and even suppress the weed growth. Pepper plants need about 1 to 2 inches of water per week. Even and consistent watering is very important. This will prevent the blossom and root rot, deformity of the fruits, and try to water your plants early in the morning, so that way the leaves dry quickly and they don't catch on any disease or anything. Next, please. Yeah, it may sound brutal, but you should pinch off your first flowers. When you pinch out early flower buds and small fruits, it will help produce a stronger and more prolific plants. They need to put out more leaves, to bear more fruits at the end. Next, please. Like Kathy said, staking is very important. You should stake all tall varieties for earlier and heavier harvest. And once the fruit begin to set, your side dressing of fertilizer will help boost the productivity. But be cautious not to apply much fertilizer, as this will cause more leaf growth and delay the fruit production. Next, please. Good cultural practices, they're very necessary. There are few diseases that will impact your pepper plants, but if you follow these good practices, you can reduce the incidence of these diseases. First is planting certified disease-free seeds. You can buy it from a lot of certified vendors, and that way you can avoid disease in the plants. Vegetable crop rotation. Every like 2 to 4 years, it should be rotated. Like don't plant it in the same area. Planting pepper plants in warm, light, and well-drained soil. You should keep water from splashing on pepper foliage and try to water it early in the morning. And avoid like overcrowding of the plants and weed your plant beds properly. And you should clean up any dead plant debris around the plants. Next, please. And these are the common problems that you will encounter with your pepper plants, like the insects like aphids, cutworms, flea beetles, European corn borer. And the diseases are the tobacco mosaic virus, anthracnose, and bacterial spot. The picture shows the anthracnose fruit rot. It will cause a sunken lesion in the fruit. And the cultural problems that you can encounter is the blossom end rot. This comes from moisture irregularities, and that will eventually deter the plant from absorbing the calcium from the plant. Calcium from the ground. So you can see a rot at the bottom of the fruit. The picture shows it. Next, please. Harvesting and storing the pepper plants. You should be assured to pick the pods at the right color for that variety. Usually the seed packets will tell you what color to look for, when should wear gloves while picking the hot peppers. And most peppers, you should be clipping the stem of the fruit with the sharp shears, because if you try to pull it, you might damage the plant. Peppers, they usually keep fresh for a week or more in the refrigerator. But if you refrigerate longer, then, you might see the pitted skin, it shrivels up. So that's about it. And as you continue to harvest, the plants will continue to produce more flowers and set more fruits. And these are my references that I used. Thank you.
Okay, so the question that was submitted earlier was about slugs and slug control related to peppers. So Libby, any thoughts about that?
You can use organic slug pellets, they are made from ferric phosphate, and you can spread it around the plant. And those slug pellets are not harmful to birds or other wildlife. So, as soon as if you have a problem, that you have a problem, as soon as you plant the plants outside, try to spread those slug pellets. And this might, help control the slug population. And another thing was the copper wires or the copper barriers that you can use around the plants that that are susceptible to slug. The slugs love those plants, so those two I can those are organically thing,
I'd like to interject a couple of other pretty simple ones too. You can just take lids, jar lids, and fill them with beer. Slugs love beer and they will drown in the beer, but you need to replace it about every couple of days or when it rains. Another thing that you can do, you can also spread diatomaceous earth around your plant, or you can use even builder sand. That is, they don't like that. And actually the diatomaceous earth actually, I think, cuts them. So those are a couple of other things you can use to keep slugs away from your plants. All right, so
we have a question about topping or pruning. Do you recommend topping pepper plants, and if so, which type?
I've never topped any of my plants because they tend not to get to be more than about 3 feet tall. I mean, maybe I've inadvertently maybe when I pulled a pepper off and then took the top of the plant, but no, your plant is it's gonna be you want it to be a short, stocky plant. So no, I wouldn't do any pruning or topping unless somebody, Kathleen, you or Lippy have any suggestions about that?
No, I've never topped those plants. I think, you consider topping a plant if the top of the plant is likely to go to seed or bolt or, otherwise become unproductive. If you pinch off the early flowers or just keep up with harvesting the fruit, you're doing the equivalent of topping.
Mhm.
You shouldn't need to trim off the actual top of the plant.
Kathleen's kind of picking up on one of the questions. I'm going to skip one about pests and go to this one because it's related. If you pick peppers, does that stimulate more fruit in peppers? The more you pick, the more fruits you get? Question mark.
Yeah, I think it's true. As you continue to harvest, the plants will continue to produce more flowers and set more fruit. So yeah, you should be like, I don't remember, like Cindy said or Kathy said that if you leave the fruits on, the plant puts in a lot more energy just to sustain that fruit. So yeah, harvesting more will produce more.
I can tell you that the opposite is true. If you don't, you'll get less fruit. So if that proves the positive, then I agree.
Harvesting helps. So of the pests that were covered in the presentation, are there some recommendations on helping to deter the pests? Any thoughts from any of you on that?
I think I covered the slide that said, like, if you follow those good cultural practices, you might be able to pretty much keep your pepper plant, pest free. Yeah, but I don't know, Cindy, do you have anything else like?
Well, occasionally I have had a tomato hornworm on my peppers. But of course I noticed that pretty quickly. But I do think just good cultural practices, trying not to do a lot of overhead watering, and then just checking your plant, when you're at the garden, look for pests. You're going to know if you've got slug damage because you're going to see the holes in the leaves. Or if there's a tomato hornworm, you're going to see that pretty quickly. Occasionally, I do have one chili pecan plant that I've had for years that I overwinter every year, and that one tends to get aphids, but that's because it's in my house. It's never had aphids outside. It's just, unfortunately, the conditions in my basement that there's aphids there, but that's pretty easy to correct. You can just, do some safer soap or some soapy water, or just use a tough spray on your hose and get rid of the aphids. But I don't think of any other major pests. Can you think of anything else, Kathleen? I mean, I know we've interjected.
No, I mean, I grow mostly hot peppers, and
Yeah.
Insects tend to leave them alone.
I think you do need to be careful with the hot. I mean, you do need to look at the Scoville scale before you start growing peppers, because some of these are extremely hot. And I know that sometimes you are tempted, I guess, to be exciting or whatever, and say you want to grow a Carolina Reaper. Well, I think you just need to really be careful, because, a bite out of a Carolina Reaper could be pretty scary for someone. So you need to look at that scale, and you can go online, and there's lots of different slides that talk about the Scoville scale, and choose what you think you can tolerate. I mean, I don't go any higher than a habanero, but people, grow these red 7 pots, and I just think they can be dangerous. So you need to be cautious if you have children around. I just think that's one thing you do have to worry about. I mean, that is, capsium from peppers is what is used for pepper spray in law enforcement. So it can be they can be very, very hot. So you just need to take that precaution.
It's also a little frustrating, right? Because, as vegetable gardeners, we view volume of yield as a measure of success or something, satisfaction. And so if you grow yourself a whole bowl of habaneros, one goes a long way, and your neighbors may take 3, right? But you got a whole bowl of habaneros that you got to figure out, am I going to dry these and try to keep them on hand, or am I going to have to dispose of them because nobody can consume enough of them fast enough? So anyway, it may interfere with your gardening satisfaction if you pick something too hot.
Your comments are related to some of the next couple of questions about how many peppers you would plant in a 4x8 bed.
4x8.
Well, if you're doing, yeah, you do it. You answer that, Kathleen.
In a 4x8 bed, I mean, if I'm assuming you want to plant that's your total footage. This isn't just your, dedicated pepper bed. If you're planting hot peppers and you've got a couple of varieties that you like, I plant, let's say, one of each of the hot pepper varieties. If you wanted to do jalapeno on the kind of lighter side, and then something further up the Scoville scale just to see what it's like, some Thai peppers or even habaneros, one of each is enough probably for a small household. And then for sweet peppers, plant 2 varieties, I would say. So if you're going to be sharing your 4x8 bed with tomato plants and other things, remember not to plant things so close that they get shaded and shadowed. But I would think two sweet pepper plants and 2 hot pepper plants would be satisfying for a small household.
There's a question about container gardening for peppers and the size of the pot, and concerned about whether it, does it outgrow its pot? Can it be too small? And the questioner is specifically interested in the hot peppers like jalapeno and serrano. What's the optimum container size?
Hot peppers do very well in containers. The ones that I get, I buy them at Costco when they go on sale every spring. I think they're 24 inches across the top, and you can probably put 3 pepper plants in there and have them grow very successfully.
Yeah, or think about a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket. I mean, you could grow some there are smaller varieties of peppers. You can get dwarf varieties where the plants don't take up so much space. But I try to, when I talk to gardeners, I try to say, think of a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket. A plant per bucket. But if it's a smaller pepper, you could put maybe 2. I love serranos. I plant a lot of serranos and poblenos and marconis. I feel like you can't go wrong with a poblano. A poblano is really like a bell, but just with a little bit of heat, and it really adds a lot to a dish. I'm trying some new peppers this year that are Turkish peppers. I actually bought them from Baker's Creek. So if you haven't seen the Baker's Creek seed catalog, it's an amazing catalog, and there are lots of different varieties of peppers. I only grow 1 habanero pepper because I tend to get like 20 or 30 habaneros, and like Kathleen's saying, what are you going to do with all these habaneros? And I share, but my go-to picks are my poblenos, my serranos, and I do like Thais too, but and I love jalapenos. And you can buy jalapenos now. I've bought them from Texas A&M that are yellow, green, and red, and orange. So that is the in color. They all start green, but then they turn the different colors, and that makes it a very attractive Christmas gift. I've done like, what do they call them? Candy jalapenos or something like that. So there are lots of things you can do with peppers in drying them and using them later for gifts, or just keeping them in your pantry.
You're making me want a recipe.
Oh yeah, it's called cowboy. I'm sorry, it's called cowboy candy, and it's beautiful at Christmas. If you let some of your peppers turn red, and then it's just red and green. It's super simple to do.
Fantastic. There's another question in the chat. Can you overwinter peppers? And if so, when you take them in, and how do they get stored? Do they go in the dark?
Oh no, I have a chili pecan that I've had from my mother's. I've had it probably for a long time. I keep pruning it. It comes in, it has to stay under lights. So I do end up usually every year have a little bit of aphid problem with it, but I just spray it and it's fine. It's just, sometimes you have a plant that has a memory, and it's a connection to my parents. They always grew these chili pecans. It's a very hot pepper. It's about the size of an M&M. And it's sometimes it's called the African bird pepper, but it's really from Mexico. And I always make salsa with them, and it's just a delicious pepper. But you can overwinter them, but you're going to have either them under lights, or you're going to have them in a very bright room. I still water mine, but I keep it very sparingly. And yes, I do still harvest peppers over the winter from that little chili. That's the only pepper that I keep inside. Everything else I just grow from seed the next year. But yes, they produce all through the winter. In fact, I just pulled a whole bunch of mine off, and I've dried them, and I'm going to just, make them into, I'm going to grind them. But you do, like Kathleen said, you need to be very wary also, depending upon the heat of the pepper, to make sure and wear gloves. Any time that you touch any of that capsium, and you touch some other place on your face, it's still there, and it can be very distressing. So always wear gloves. It's really supposed to only be in the veins and in the seeds, but that is not really true. There is still capsium in those hot peppers. So always wear gloves.